Welcome to Nightwhisper. Nightwhisper brings you the darkest tales from the shadows. Join our community. Subscribe, leave a like, and prepare yourself for stories that will haunt your dreams. The call came in at 3:47 a.m. on the 8th of March, 2019. I remember the time precisely because I had been lying on my back, staring at my ceiling for hours, unable to sleep, watching the minutes tick away one by one in the red numbers of my alarm clock. Insomnia was my shadow after 15 years of pulling bodies out of places no living person should ever have to see. Some nights were worse than others, the faces of the dead swimming up from the darkness behind my eyes, their mouths open in silent screams that only I could hear. This was one of the bad nights. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen flaring with a harsh blue light that made me grimace. The number was blocked. In my line of work, blocked numbers generally came in one of two flavors. A prank call from some kid who'd found your name on a diving forum and wanted to know what it was like to touch a dead body, or something serious enough that the people involved didn't want any record of the call. Something that never shows up in any official report. "Mr. Ward?" The voice was clipped, precise. Military, maybe, or something adjacent to it. "Elias Ward?" "Speaking." "You have been requested for an emergency extraction consultation. A vehicle will arrive at your residence in 45 minutes. Please be prepared for cold water operations. Compensation will be discussed on site." "Hold on," I said, sitting up in bed. The springs creaked beneath me. An old mattress in an old apartment, both well past their prime. "Who is this? What agency?" 45 minutes, Mr. Ward." The line went dead. Let me explain what I did for a living back then. I was a deep water rescue specialist, one of maybe 200 people in the whole country qualified for the kind of operations that made regular rescue divers refuse the call. Collapsed mine shafts flooded with 30-degree water. Cave systems where the passages narrowed to 18 inches and one wrong turn meant you'd never see daylight again. Underwater body recovery in conditions so bad that most emergency services simply declared the victims unrecoverable and moved on. I'd been doing this work since I was 23 years old. Fresh out of the Navy, with a diving certification that most employers didn't even know existed. I'd pulled a 6-year-old girl from a submerged car while her dead mother floated 3 feet away, her eyes still open, still looking at me. I'd recovered the remains of a honeymoon couple from an underwater cave in Kentucky, their fingers still intertwined after 3 weeks underwater. The woman had been 7 weeks pregnant. I'd spent 9 hours in a flooded copper mine in Michigan, breathing recycled air and praying my tanks wouldn't give out, just to bring back the body of a 19-year-old who'd gone exploring with his friends and never came back up. I thought I'd seen everything this job could throw at me. I was wrong. The black SUV arrived exactly 45 minutes later, pulling into the gravel driveway of my rental house outside Knoxville. 2 men in the front, neither of them speaking. They wore dark suits that seemed wrong for the hour, wrong for the location, wrong for everything about this situation. One of them handed me a tablet with a non-disclosure agreement already loaded, the signature line blinking expectantly at the bottom of the screen. I read through it carefully. 8 pages of dense legal language that essentially said I couldn't talk about anything I was about to see or do for the next 10 years, under penalty of federal prosecution and a list of other consequences that would make a lawyer weep. Federal prosecution for a diving consultation. I almost handed it back, almost asked them to take me home. But then I scrolled to the compensation section, and the number there made my eyes widen. 6 figures. For a single operation that couldn't possibly take more than a few days, I signed it anyway. The money they were offering was enough to make me overlook a lot of questions. We drove for nearly 3 hours, heading deep into the Appalachian Mountains. The roads got progressively worse. Paved highway giving way to gravel, then dirt, then something that barely qualified as a path. The SUV's suspension groaned over every rock and pothole, and by the time we finally stopped, The sky was just starting to lighten on the eastern horizon, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange that seemed too beautiful for what was about to happen. And that's when I saw it. The valley below us was swarming with activity. Dozens of vehicles, military trucks, unmarked vans, what looked like mobile laboratory units with satellite dishes on their roofs, all clustered around what appeared to be a dried-up reservoir. I counted at least 15 different agency logos on the vehicles I could see: FEMA, EPA, USGS, Army Corps of Engineers, and probably twice as many that were deliberately unmarked. Temporary floodlights illuminated the basin even though dawn was breaking. People in various uniforms moved with that particular urgency that meant something had gone very, very wrong. "What the hell happened here?" I asked. Neither driver answered. They just pointed toward a cluster of tents near the basin's edge, their faces as blank and professional as mannequins. I made my way down the hillside, my equipment bag slung over one shoulder, the morning dew soaking through my boots with every step. As I got closer, I could see that the reservoir wasn't just dried up. It had collapsed. A massive sinkhole had opened up in the center, maybe 40 feet across, with sheer walls dropping into darkness. The water that had once filled this basin had drained into whatever lay beneath, leaving behind only a moonscape of dried mud and stranded fish, their scales already dulling in the open air. I could see the waterline stain on the surrounding rocks at least 60 feet higher than the current ground level. All that water, millions upon millions of gallons, just gone, swallowed by the earth in what must have been a matter of hours. Elias Ward? I turned to find a woman in her 50s approaching me, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed immune to the mountain breeze. She wore a dark pantsuit that looked wildly impractical for the muddy terrain, and her expression suggested she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, preferably somewhere with climate control and no dirt. "That's me. I'm Director Annette Vance. Thank you for coming on such short notice." She didn't offer her hand to shake. "I understand you have questions. Unfortunately, I don't have time to answer most of them. What I can tell you is this. Approximately 18 hours ago, a minor seismic event caused a catastrophic drainage of this reservoir into a previously unknown underground system. We need your team to conduct an exploratory dive and retrieve geological samples from the cavern below." "My team?" "You'll be working with two other specialists, Reese Calder and Livia Shore. I believe you've worked with them before." I did know them. Reese and I had worked together on a body recovery operation in West Virginia 3 years back. A teenage girl who'd gotten lost in a flooded cave system while exploring with her boyfriend. He was 41, ex-Coast Guard, calm under pressure in a way that bordered on eerie. The kind of guy who triple-checked everything and still found something to worry about, but never let that worry slow him down when it mattered. Livia was younger, 36, but she'd made a name for herself with some of the most dangerous solo dives on record. She'd mapped underwater cave systems in Mexico's Yucatan that had killed dozens of divers before her, and she'd done it alone, with nothing but her equipment and her nerve. If they'd assembled the three of us, this wasn't just a sample collection mission. Something else was going on here. Something they weren't telling me. "Where are they?" I asked. Suiting up near the primary access point, we've established a base camp approximately 30 meters from the sinkhole. You'll find your equipment waiting for you there as well. Top of the line, all of it. We spared no expense. "And the timeline?" Director Vance's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only crack in her professional facade. "We have until sunset. After that, this becomes someone else's jurisdiction, and I promise you, you don't want it to be their jurisdiction." She walked away before I could ask what that meant, her heels somehow finding purchase in the mud that was threatening to swallow my boots whole. I found Reese and Livia exactly where Director Vance said they'd be, surrounded by equipment cases and looking just as confused as I felt. Reese had aged since I'd last seen him, more gray in his beard, deeper lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, but he still had that same steady presence that made him invaluable in a crisis. He was the kind of guy you wanted beside you when things went wrong, because when things went wrong, Reese got calmer, more focused, more certain. Livia was checking her regulator with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times before. Her dark hair was already tucked under a dive cap, and even in the dim light of dawn, I could see the intensity in her eyes. She looked like she was about to walk into a fight she fully intended to win. "Ward," Reese said, standing to shake my hand with a grip that hadn't weakened with age. "Hell of a morning, huh?" "You could say that. Anyone tell you what we're actually doing here?" "Geological samples," Livia said, without looking up from her equipment. "That's the official line, anyway. 3 specialists with a combined half-century of experience assembled in the middle of the night to collect rocks. Makes perfect sense." "And the unofficial line?" She finally met my eyes, and something in her expression made my stomach tighten. "Take a look at the sinkhole. Tell me what you see." I walked to the edge of the basin, picking my way through the mud until I could see down into the hole. It was larger than I'd initially thought, maybe 50 feet across, with sheer walls dropping into darkness. Floodlights had been positioned around the perimeter, their beams cutting down into the abyss, but they didn't illuminate much. Maybe 40 feet down, the walls curved inward and disappeared. And beyond that was nothing but black. The kind of black that seemed to swallow light rather than merely lacking it. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. "Is that ice?" I asked. "Frost," Livia said, coming up beside me. Her breath fogged in the air, even though it was early March and the morning wasn't that cold. "The water down there is near freezing. Has been for a long time, apparently. Whatever ecosystem exists in that cave system has been completely isolated from the surface. Some of these agency people are talking about timescales of 50,000 years, maybe longer. 50,000 years. An entire world sealed away in the dark since before the last ice age ended, before agriculture, before civilization, before humans had even reached this continent." My mind struggled to wrap itself around the concept. 50,000 years of evolution happening in complete isolation, with no sunlight, no contact with the surface, no influence from the world above. And they want us to just dive into it? "They're not asking," Reese said quietly, joining us at the rim. Below, I could hear the faint drip of water echoing up from the depths. "Trust me, I already tried to push back. Told them we needed more time, more information, a proper survey. These people don't take no for an answer." The woman in charge, Vance, made it very clear what would happen to our careers if we refused. "What happens if we refuse?" "Nothing good," Livia said. "I got the impression that this whole site is going to be sealed permanently after today. Whatever's down there, they don't want anyone else finding it. We're the last chance to document it before it disappears forever." I thought about that for a long moment. 50,000 years of isolation. A cave system large enough to drain an entire reservoir in a matter of hours. And a government so concerned about what might be down there that they'd assembled this kind of response team in less than 24 hours, with enough resources to make a small nation jealous. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to walk away, to take the NDA violation penalty and deal with the consequences, to get in my truck and drive until this place was nothing but a bad memory. But that's the thing about being in this profession. You don't get into deep water rescue because you're good at walking away. You get into it because something in your brain is wired differently, because the darkness and the pressure and the unknown that make normal people turn back are exactly the things that pull you forward. Because you've spent your whole life being drawn to places where you don't belong. "All right," I said finally, turning away from the abyss. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The descent took almost 2 hours to set up properly. Unlike most emergency operations I'd worked, we actually had time to prepare. Reese insisted on it, invoking every safety protocol in the book, and for once, even the stone-faced agents didn't argue with him. They'd already lost equipment to the cave system, a survey drone that had gone down on a tether and simply never come back up. When they pulled the cable back, they found the end had been severed cleanly, about 300 feet down. Severed, not snagged on a rock formation, not tangled in debris, not frayed by abrasion. Cut. Probably just a sharp edge, one of the technicians suggested, but I noticed he couldn't look any of us in the eye when he said it. We established a 3-point safety system, primary air tanks on our backs, secondary bailout bottles on our hips, and a continuous hookah line feeding from a compressor on the surface. We had hardwired communication links. No wireless signals were going to penetrate that much rock. And each of us carried a personal locator beacon that would ping our position every 30 seconds. We mapped out emergency protocols, established check-in times, agreed on abort procedures. Everything by the book. The water temperature was brutal. 34 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill an unprotected human in under 10 minutes, cold enough to slow your thinking and numb your extremities even through the best insulation money could buy. We wore full dry suits with thermal underlayers, neoprene hoods and gloves, everything we had. But even with all that protection, I could feel the chill seeping into my bones the moment my fingertips touched the surface. Livia went first, her light cutting a pale cone through the murky water as she descended into the dark. Reese followed, then me. We moved slowly, equalizing every few feet to manage the pressure change, our movements deliberate and careful. The walls of the sinkhole were smooth at first, clearly artificial, part of the original reservoir construction dating back to the 1950s, but around 60 feet down, they became jagged and rough. Natural limestone, ancient and worn by water that had been flowing through these mountains since long before humans walked the earth. "Passing the transition zone," Livia reported, her voice crackling in my earpiece. "Water clarity is improving, visibility maybe 20 feet. She was right. The murky brown water of the upper levels gave way to something clearer, though still tinged with a faint greenish hue. Mineral content, probably. I'd seen similar coloration in deep wells and underground aquifers, places where the water had spent centuries filtering through rock. At 100 feet, the shaft opened up. I've been diving for most of my adult life. I've seen underwater canyons in the Pacific that dropped away into endless blue. I've explored ice caves in Greenland where the light turned everything to crystal. I've floated in the open ocean, miles from land, with nothing but empty water in every direction. But nothing prepared me for what lay beneath that reservoir. The shaft emptied into a cavern so vast that our lights couldn't find the walls. We hung there in the darkness, 3 tiny specks of illumination in an underground ocean, and I felt smaller than I ever had in my entire life. The water stretched out in every direction, black as ink, cold as death, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the faint echo of moving water, currents in a world that had never seen the sun. "Jesus Christ," Reese whispered, and for once his voice carried something other than calm. "Surface control, are you receiving our video feed?" Livia asked, all business even in the face of the impossible. Static crackled in our earpieces for a moment, then cleared. "We're receiving your video feed. Image quality is good. Proceed with primary survey. Mark your position and begin sample collection." "Understood. Ward, Calder, spread formation, 20-meter intervals. Let's see if we can find some boundaries to this space." We split up, each of us swimming in a different direction while maintaining visual contact with the other's lights. 3 tiny stars in an underground sky, drifting apart but never quite losing sight of each other. The water was crystal clear now, visibility extending to the full range of our high-intensity beams, at least 60 feet in every direction. I angled downward, trying to find the floor of this impossible cathedral. At 200 feet, I found it. The bottom of the cavern was covered in a fine white sediment, almost like sand, but when I touched it, it had a strange powdery consistency that clouded the water around my hand. Calcium deposits maybe, built up over millennia as mineral-rich water filtered through the rock above. Scattered across this pale desert were formations I didn't recognize, tall, spiraling structures that looked almost like coral, except they were completely colorless. Albino growths evolved in total darkness, reaching toward a sun they had never known. I collected several samples, sealing them carefully in the specimen bags attached to my belt. The growths broke easily, like dried bone, and inside they were hollow, some kind of filter-feeding organism perhaps, extracting nutrients from the water. Life that had found a way to survive in a place where nothing should have been able to survive. "I've got something," Livia's voice crackled through the calm, cutting through my thoughts. "Northwest quadrant, approximately 80 meters from entry point. There's a tunnel system here." "Size?" "Big enough to drive a truck through, maybe bigger. I'm counting at least 5 branches from the main opening." This matched what the surface team had theorized. The cavern we were in was just the main chamber of a much larger cave system, possibly extending for miles in every direction. The reservoir water had drained into this space and then dispersed through countless smaller passages, spreading out beneath the mountains like blood vessels branching from a heart. "Begin mapping," Director Vance's voice cut in from the surface. "Document everything. We need a complete survey of any accessible passages." "That would take weeks," Reese said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "Months, maybe. We've got maybe 4 hours of bottom time before decompression becomes a serious issue." "Then make them count." We regrouped at the tunnel entrance Livia had found. The opening was massive, at least 30 feet across, carved by water over geological time. The walls were smooth, sculpted by countless centuries of flowing water, and they curved downward into the darkness at an angle that made my stomach clench. This wasn't just a cave. This was a pathway into the deep places of the earth. "I'll take point," Livia said, adjusting her equipment. "Ward, your center. Calder, watch our 6. "Copy that." We entered the tunnel system. For the first hour, we simply followed the main passage, documenting everything we saw. The walls were covered with those same colorless growths, some kind of extremophile organism that had evolved to survive in complete isolation. In a few places, we found larger formations, almost like underwater trees, their branches reaching toward some light source that hadn't existed for tens of thousands of years. Evolution doesn't stop just because the sun goes away. It just changes direction. At 300 feet, we found the first signs of mobile life. They were small at first. Tiny, translucent creatures that darted away from our lights, too fast to get a clear look at. Fish, maybe, though unlike any fish I'd ever seen. They had no pigmentation, no visible eyes, just pale ghost shapes that moved in tight schools, dozens of them swirling through the beam of my flashlight before vanishing into the darkness like they'd never existed. "You seeing these?" I asked, trying to track one of the creatures with my camera. "Affirmative," came the response from surface control. "Collecting visual data now. Continue forward." The tunnel branched repeatedly, but we stuck to the largest passage, marking our path with chemical glow sticks that we wedged into cracks in the wall. Every 100 feet, we stopped to check our air supply and verify our position. The locator beacons were working perfectly, pinging our coordinates back to the surface with mechanical reliability. At 350 feet, the tunnel opened into another large chamber. This one was different. The floor of this chamber was littered with bones, not animal bones, or at least not any animal I could identify. They were enormous, some of the individual segments longer than I was tall. Rib cages the size of cars, vertebrae bigger than my head, skull fragments with eye sockets that could have swallowed a basketball. Whatever had lived in this cave system, it had been huge, and it had been dead for a very, very long time. "Are you getting all this?" Livia asked, her voice tight. "Confirmed. Continued documentation." I swam down to examine one of the skulls more closely, my light playing over bone that had been preserved in the cold, dark water for God knows how many millennia. The structure was eerily familiar. Elongated cranium, forward-facing eye sockets that spoke of binocular vision, predator vision. A jaw designed for crushing, not tearing, with teeth the size of my fingers. This thing, whatever it was, had been an apex predator, the top of a food chain that existed in complete isolation from the world above. "Ward, check your 9 o'clock. I turned, following Reese's direction, and felt my blood run cold. Partially buried in the sediment, maybe 50 feet away, was another skeleton. But this one wasn't ancient. The bones were still white, still held together by scraps of dried connective tissue that waved gently in the slight current. And wrapped around what remained of the ribcage was something that didn't belong in any cave system on Earth. A diving harness, modern, maybe 5 years old. "Surface control," I said slowly, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We have human remains. Repeat, we have human remains. Diving equipment still attached." The silence stretched for so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Then Director Vance's voice came through, cold and flat. "Understood. Document and proceed." Document and proceed. Someone died down here. There should be a recovery operation, an investigation. "Mr. Ward." Her voice cut through the static like a knife through water. "That is not your concern. Your objective is to complete the survey and collect samples, nothing else. Is that understood?" I looked at the body, at what was left of it. The skull was missing, along with most of the upper spine. The dive suit had been torn open from the inside out, the neoprene peeled back like the rind of a fruit. Whatever had killed this person hadn't done it quickly. "There was a team before us," Livia said quietly, swimming closer to examine the remains. "That's why they needed us on such short notice. They lost people down here." "How many?" Reese asked, his voice hard. No response from the surface. "How many people have you sent down here?" Still nothing. I swam closer to the remains, ignoring every instinct that told me to turn back. The equipment was relatively modern, high-end stuff, the kind of gear only professionals used. The air tanks were still attached, both of them completely empty. This person had run out of air down here, alone in the dark, with something hunting them. Something hunting them. The thought crystallized in my mind, bringing with it a wave of cold that had nothing to do with the water temperature. Those ancient skeletons, predators, every one of them. And now a human body torn apart in a way that no accident could explain. We weren't alone down here. "Movement!" Reese's voice cracked through the calm, sharp with sudden fear. "Northeast corner, something just moved." I spun, my light sweeping across the chamber. For a moment, I saw nothing, just pale sediment and ancient bones, the slow drift of particles in the water. Then something shifted at the edge of my beam. Something big. It moved too fast to get a clear look, but the impression burned itself into my memory like a brand. Long, pale limbs that seemed to have too many joints, bending in directions that made my brain hurt to process. A body that was all wrong, elongated, stretched, like something that had evolved to squeeze through the tightest spaces, and eyes, milky white eyes, that caught the light and reflected it back like mirrors. Then it was gone, vanished into one of the branching tunnels faster than anything that size should have been able to move. "Surface control, we have contact," Livia reported, her voice steady despite what we'd just seen. "Unknown organism, estimated length 15 to 20 feet, extremely fast, requesting guidance." The response was immediate. "Continue mission." Did you not hear what I just said? There's something alive down here, something big, something that apparently killed whoever you sent down before us. We're aware. Continue mission. You have 3 hours of bottom time remaining. I looked at Reese, then at Livia. Even through their masks, I could see the same calculation happening behind their eyes. We could refuse. We could turn around right now, ascend to the surface, and walk away from this nightmare. Whatever they threatened, whatever consequences they promised, it had to be better than staying down here with that thing. But we all knew what walking away would mean. For our careers, for our reputations, for everything we'd spent our lives building. Tight formation, Livia said finally, her jaw set. No one goes more than 3 meters from the group. We continue for 1 more hour, then we head back. Agreed? Reese and I both nodded. We swam deeper into the cave system, leaving the bone chamber and its secrets behind. 30 minutes into our continued descent, we found the nest. There was no other word for it. The tunnel opened into a smaller chamber, maybe 40 feet across, and the walls were covered with some kind of organic material, a pale, fibrous substance that looked almost like dried Ines new or cartilage. It glistened wetly in our lights, pulsing with a faint rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. Woven into this material were dozens of egg-like structures, each one about the size of a basketball, their surfaces translucent enough to see movement inside. Something was growing in there. Something alive, curled in on itself like a fist waiting to open. "Surface control?" Livia whispered. "Are you seeing this?" "Confirmed. Visual feed is excellent. Approach and collect samples." "You want us to touch those things? After what we just saw down in the bone chamber?" "Affirmative. Biological samples are priority 1. This is why you're here, Ms. Shore. This is why we assembled the best team available. The geological samples were always secondary. We need tissue from those organisms." I exchanged a look with Livia through our masks. So that was the real reason we were down here. Not rocks, not cave formations. Them. Whatever these things were, the government, or whoever was really behind this operation, wanted samples, wanted to study them, wanted to understand what 50,000 years of isolation had created. I watched one of the egg sacs pulse, something inside it pressing against the membrane, a limb maybe, something with too many joints, curled tight against itself. Or something worse. "I'll do it," I said, not entirely sure why. Maybe because someone had to, and I'd rather it be me, than either of them. Maybe because some part of me needed to see this through, needed to understand what we'd stumbled into. Maybe because I'd already signed an NDA that meant I'd never be able to tell anyone about this anyway. And if I was going to carry this secret for the rest of my life, I wanted to know exactly what I was carrying. I swam toward the nearest cluster of eggs, specimen bag in hand. Up close, I could see more detail through the translucent membrane. Coiled forms, pale and motionless, waiting to be born into a world of eternal darkness. They had limbs. Too many limbs, folded against their bodies like origami. And those same milky eyes, still closed, still waiting. My hand was shaking as I reached for the nearest egg. The membrane was warm to the touch, warmer than the surrounding water, which shouldn't have been possible. Some kind of internal heat source, metabolic processes happening in there that I couldn't begin to understand. The moment I touched it, everything went wrong. A sound erupted from somewhere deeper in the tunnel system, a shriek that cut through the water like a blade, so loud and high-pitched that my eardrums throbbed with pain. The eggs began to pulse in unison, their occupants suddenly awake and thrashing against their confines. And from the darkness behind us, I heard movement. Lots of movement. "Go!" Livia shouted. "Go now!" We didn't need to be told twice. I abandoned the sample collection and kicked hard toward the exit tunnel, Reese and Livia right behind me. The shrieking continued, joined now by other sounds, clicking, scraping. The rush of water displaced by fast-moving bodies. Lots of bodies. They were coming. I don't know how many there were. In the chaos of our retreat, I caught glimpses, pale shapes surging through the water like torpedoes, those two long limbs reaching, grasping, closing in from every direction with a coordination that spoke of pack hunting. They communicated somehow, these things. They worked together. One of them passed close enough for me to see its face, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. The skull was almost human, but stretched and distorted, the proportions all wrong, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror that had somehow become flesh. The jaw was hinged like a snake's, capable of opening far wider than any human mouth, and it was lined with rows of needle-thin teeth that overlapped and interlocked like the gears of some biological machine. It had no nose, no ears, no features except for those terrible white eyes and that terrible mouth designed over countless generations for one singular purpose: to catch, to hold, to consume. These things weren't just predators. They were perfect predators, optimized by 50,000 years of evolution in total darkness, in an environment where there was no room for error, no margin for weakness. And we had just walked into their home. "Reese!" Livia screamed. I turned just in time to see one of the creatures grab Reese by the leg, its fingers wrapping around his calf like bands of pale steel. He thrashed, trying to break free, but more limbs were already reaching for him, more of those things converging from the darkness. The water around him exploded into a cloud of silt and bubbles and blood. I tried to go back. I swear to God, I tried. But Livia grabbed my arm and pulled me forward, and the last thing I saw was Reese's light spinning into the darkness as something dragged him down into the tunnels below. I could hear him screaming through the calm, a wet, gurgling sound that cut off suddenly and completely, leaving only static. And then we were running. There's no other way to describe it. We weren't swimming anymore. We were fleeing. Pure animal panic driving us through the tunnels faster than any safety protocol would allow. Livia was ahead of me, her fins churning the water into foam, and I matched her stroke for stroke as the sounds of pursuit echoed behind us. The glow sticks we'd left as markers became our lifeline. Every flash of green light meant we were still on the right path, still moving toward the surface, still alive. But they also meant we were predictable. Whatever was chasing us knew exactly where we were going. "Surface control!" I screamed into my comm. "We're coming up hot! Calder is down! Repeat, Calder is down! We need immediate extraction!" Static. Nothing but static. We'd gone too deep. The hardwired communications couldn't penetrate this much rock. We were on our own. The bone chamber loomed ahead, and we shot through it without stopping. I caught a glimpse of the human remains we'd found earlier, that empty dive suit, that shattered skeleton, and I understood now what had happened to whoever they'd sent before us. They'd found this place, just like we had. They'd disturbed something they shouldn't have, and they'd paid the price. Something grabbed my fin. I kicked hard, felt resistance, then freedom, as whatever had caught me lost its grip. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. The main shaft was ahead. I could see Livia's light cutting through the darkness, angling upward toward the surface. We were close. So close. If we could just make it to the narrower passages, maybe the creatures couldn't follow. Maybe the shaft was too tight for them. Maybe we'd live. I reached the shaft and began my ascent, following Livia's bubbles upward. Above me, I could see the faint glow of the surface lights, impossibly far away. 300 feet of dark water between us and salvation. 300 feet of narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for one person at a time. That was what saved us. The creatures, whatever they were, had evolved in the vast open spaces of the lower cavern. Their bodies were designed for speed in open water, for ambush hunting in 3 dimensions. But the shaft was different. The shaft was confined. I heard them behind me, heard their bodies scraping against the rock walls as they tried to force themselves upward. The shrieking had stopped, replaced by something worse. A frustrated clicking sound, like a hunting dog losing the scent of its prey. They couldn't fit. They couldn't follow. We climbed. The pressure change was brutal. We were ascending far too fast, risking decompression sickness with every stroke. The bends could kill us just as surely as the creatures below. Nitrogen bubbles forming in our blood, blocking arteries, causing strokes and heart attacks, and 100 other ways to die. But given the choice between dying slowly from gas bubbles in my bloodstream and being torn apart by those things, I'd take my chances with the bends. At 150 feet, I felt the first cramp. It started in my calf, a sharp stabbing pain that made me cry out into my mask. Then my shoulder, my neck, my lower back, all seizing up simultaneously as dissolved gases began to form bubbles in my tissues. I gritted my teeth and kept swimming, kept pushing upward even as my body screamed at me to stop, to slow down, to decompress properly. Livia wasn't doing any better. I could see her movements becoming jerky, uncoordinated. She was cramping too. At 100 feet, I heard something behind me. One of them had made it into the shaft, smaller than the others maybe, or just more determined. I could hear it climbing, those two long limbs finding purchase on the rock walls. It was slower than before. The confined space was working against it, but it was still coming, still hunting. 50 feet to go. Livia breached the surface first, pulling herself onto the rocky edge of the sinkhole with arms that barely seemed to work. I was right behind her, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming, every inch of my body feeling like it had been filled with broken glass and fire. I broke the surface and grabbed the rocks, hauling myself out of the water. "Close it!" I screamed. "Close the goddamn hole!" There were people around us, agents, technicians, soldiers with weapons I didn't recognize. They stared at us in shock, frozen by the sudden chaos. I could see Director Vance pushing through the crowd, her face pale. "Where's Calder?" "Dead. They killed him. Close the fucking hole." Something splashed behind me. I turned just in time to see a pale hand emerge from the water, those elongated fingers reaching for the rock's edge. Then another hand, then 2 more. It was climbing out. Someone fired a gun. The sound was deafening in the mountain air, and I saw the creature jerk as bullets tore through its pale flesh. But it didn't stop. It kept climbing, hauling itself onto the rocks with terrible determination. For the first time, I saw one of them in full light. It was worse than I'd imagined. The body was humanoid, but stretched and distorted, like a person who'd been pulled on a rack until their bones reformed into something new. The skin was completely white, hairless, covered in a thin layer of mucus that glistened in the morning sun. Its arms were too long, ending in hands with too many fingers, each one tipped with a curved claw designed for gripping rock, for holding prey. And its face. It had no features except for eyes and mouth. Those milky white eyes, now narrowed against the light, filled with an intelligence that shouldn't have existed in something so alien. And a mouth that opened to reveal rows of teeth that seemed to go back forever, like looking down the throat of a shark. More gunfire. The creature stumbled, dark blood pouring from a dozen wounds. But still, it came forward. Still, it reached for us. "Explosives!" Director Vance shouted. "Bring the charges!" Someone ran past me with a bag over their shoulder. I watched, paralyzed, as they threw the bag into the sinkhole and dove for cover. The explosion shook the ground. Rock and water erupted from the shaft, spraying across the basin. The creature was caught in the blast, torn apart by the force of it, its remains scattered across the mud. More explosions followed. A chain of charges placed around the perimeter, collapsing the sinkhole in on itself. Within minutes, there was nothing left but a pile of rubble where the entrance had been. I lay on my back in the mud, staring up at the morning sky, and tried to remember how to breathe. They kept us for 3 days. Medical treatment first. We both had severe decompression sickness, Livia worse than me. They put us in a portable hyperbaric chamber, forced us to breathe pure oxygen while the pressure slowly normalized. The pain was excruciating. Imagine every joint in your body being slowly inflated with broken glass. But at least it meant we were alive. Every muscle screamed with cramps that wouldn't stop, and there were hours when I honestly wished I'd died down there with Reese, just so the agony would end. The chamber was small and claustrophobic, just big enough for a single stretcher. I spent 18 hours in there, staring at the curved metal ceiling, listening to the hiss of oxygen and the distant murmur of voices outside. Sometimes I'd close my eyes, and I'd be back in the tunnels, swimming through darkness, feeling those long fingers wrapping around my ankle. I'd jerk awake, gasping, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Then came the debriefing. Director Vance sat across from me in a windowless room somewhere in the mountain compound, a recorder between us and 2 armed guards standing behind her. She asked questions for hours, what we'd seen, where we'd gone, every detail I could remember about the creatures in their nest. I told her everything, partly because I didn't have the energy to lie, and partly because I wanted someone else to share the weight of what we'd discovered. When I was finished, she just nodded. "You're the only ones who've come back," she said finally. "We sent 3 teams down before you, 8 people total. You and Ms. Shore are the only survivors. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have gone if we had?" I didn't answer. We both knew the truth. "What are those things?" I asked instead. Director Vance was quiet for a long moment, staring at the recorder between us. "We don't know for certain. Best guess? Some kind of convergent evolution. When humans first reached this continent, maybe 12,000 years ago, there were other species occupying similar ecological niches. Most of them went extinct, but some found ways to survive. They retreated underground into spaces where they didn't have to compete with us, and over time, in complete isolation, they changed. They looked almost human. Convergent evolution, she repeated, like a teacher explaining something to a slow student. Similar environments produce similar solutions. Bipedal movement for navigating rocky terrain, grasping hands for climbing, forward-facing eyes for depth perception in 3 dimensions. The building blocks are the same. It's just the final product that's different. And the ancient bones we found, those giant skeletons? Their ancestors, probably. Before the cave system became isolated, there were larger species down there. Apex predators, competing for resources. But without enough food to sustain that kind of body size, they evolved to be smaller, more efficient, better adapted to an environment where calories are scarce. I thought about those egg sacs, all those unborn creatures waiting in the dark, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with my injuries. There are more of them down there. Yes, in the cave system. You didn't collapse all of it, just the entrance. The cave system extends for at least 50 miles in every direction, based on our seismic surveys. We'd have to detonate nuclear weapons to seal it completely. And even then, there are probably other access points, other sinkholes we haven't found yet. The limestone in these mountains is riddled with passages. So they're still down there, waiting. Director Vance stood, gathering her recorder. "Get some rest, Mr. Ward. You'll be transported home tomorrow morning. The usual confidentiality restrictions apply. 10 years of silence, as per the agreement you signed." "That's it? That's all you're going to do?" She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "The property has been purchased by a private company called Northspan Holdings. They'll be installing fencing, security cameras, armed guards. No one will be going near that site for a very long time. And if those things find another way out?" She didn't answer. She just walked out and closed the door behind her. That was 6 years ago. I tried to go back to my normal life after they released me. For a while, I even succeeded. I did a few more rescue dives, easier ones, nothing deeper than 50 feet, nothing that would take me into the dark places where those things lived. I told myself I was fine, that what happened in those caves was just another job hazard, something I could compartmentalize and move past like all the other horrors I'd witnessed. I was lying to myself. The nightmares started about 3 months after I got home. Always the same thing. I'm back in that cave, swimming through darkness, so complete, it feels like being buried alive. The water is cold, colder than anything should be, and I can feel something behind me. I can hear it breathing, that wet, rattling sound like air being forced through a membrane. But I can never see it. I just know it's there, getting closer with every stroke, its long fingers reaching for my ankles, and no matter how fast I swim, I can never reach the surface. The tunnel just keeps going, stretching out forever, and the thing behind me keeps getting closer and closer until I can feel its breath on the back of my neck. And then I'd wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, my hands clenched so tight that my fingernails had drawn blood from my palms. Sometimes, I'd find myself standing in the corner of my bedroom, pressed against the wall, with no memory of how I got there. My body was trying to escape even when my mind was unconscious. I started sleeping with the lights on. Then, with the TV on too, just for the noise, the reminder that I was still in the real world. Then, with a loaded gun on my nightstand, even though I knew bullets wouldn't help me against what I'd seen. Nothing helped. I stopped diving after about a year. The doctors called it PTSD, gave me pills that were supposed to help me sleep, help me process, help me move on. They didn't work. Nothing helped. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Reese's face in that final moment, the realization that he was about to die, and there was nothing any of us could do to save him. I started drinking, not heavily at first, just a few beers after work to take the edge off. Then whiskey. Then whatever I could get my hands on. It got bad enough that I lost my certification, lost my job, lost pretty much everything I'd built over 15 years of dangerous work. Livia handled it better than me, as far as I know. She got therapy, found some meditation practice that helped her process the trauma. Last I heard, she was teaching diving to kids in Florida, shallow water stuff, pools and beaches, nothing that would take her below 20 feet. She reached out once, about 2 years ago, asking if I wanted to meet up and talk about what we'd experienced. I never responded. I couldn't face her, couldn't face any of it. But I kept watching. Every few months, I'd search for news about that area. Unexplained disappearances, livestock deaths, anything that might suggest those things had found a new way to the surface. For years, there was nothing. The site was exactly as Director Vance had described, fenced off, guarded, completely inaccessible. Satellite photos showed a dozen buildings had been constructed there, surrounded by security checkpoints. Whatever Northspan Holdings was doing, they weren't taking any chances. Then, about 8 months ago, something changed. A hiker went missing in the mountains about 12 miles from the original site. Search and rescue found his campsite, his equipment, even his phone, but no body. The official story was that he'd gotten lost and died of exposure, his remains scattered by animals. But I found the incident report online. I saw the photos that some volunteer SAR member had posted before they were taken down. His tent had been torn open from the outside, and on the fabric, barely visible in the camera flash, were marks that looked an awful lot like claw marks, long, curved claw marks, spaced about 6 inches apart, exactly the same spacing I remembered from the creatures in the cave, the same distinctive pattern of 4 parallel lines made by hands that weren't quite human. The official investigation concluded that a bear had probably investigated the campsite after the hiker went missing. Bears, they said. Just bears. I know what bear claw marks look like. I've seen them 100 times. These weren't bear marks. 2 months later, another disappearance. This time a young couple camping in the same general area. Same story. Equipment found, no bodies, same unexplained damage to their tent. The woman's phone was recovered with a voicemail she'd left for her mother at 2:47 a.m., her voice shaking, saying she'd heard something moving outside their tent, something big, something that sounded like it was breathing through water. The voicemail ended mid-sentence. 3 weeks ago, a property surveyor working for some development company vanished without a trace. His car was still at the trailhead when they found it, engine cold, keys still in the ignition. His last text to his wife said he was going to check out something unusual he'd spotted in one of the valleys, a hole in the ground that wasn't on any of his maps. They never found him. I've been making phone calls, reaching out to old contacts, people who still work in search and rescue, people who have access to databases I can no longer see. The pattern is clear if you know what to look for. Something is hunting in those mountains, something that comes out at night, that avoids populated areas, that takes its prey back underground where they'll never be found. The cave system extends for 50 miles, Director Vance said. Probably more. And sinkholes, new sinkholes, can form anywhere, anytime. All it takes is a little seismic activity, a shift in the water table, and suddenly there's a new door opening between their world and ours. A door that swings both ways. I think about that nest we found sometimes, lying awake at 3 a.m. with all the lights on. All those egg sacs pulsing in unison, waiting to hatch into a world they'd never seen. By now, those creatures are 6 years old, if they even age the way we understand aging. 6 years of growing, feeding on whatever they can catch in those tunnels, learning the boundaries of their underground world. 6 years of evolution in a species that's had 50,000 years to perfect the art of hunting in complete darkness. I did some research on cave ecosystems after I got back. Troglobites, they're called, creatures that have evolved to live exclusively in caves. Most of them are small, blind fish, albino crayfish, translucent insects. They tend to have slow metabolisms because food is scarce underground. They reproduce slowly and live long lives. But they're not usually predators. Not apex predators, anyway. There isn't enough biomass in most cave systems to support large carnivores. So how did those things survive down there for 50,000 years? What were they eating before the reservoir drained and connected their world to ours? I don't have an answer. And honestly, I'm not sure I want one. And we have no idea how many of them there are. I don't dive anymore. I can barely bring myself to take a shower some days. The feeling of water on my skin triggers memories I've spent years trying to suppress. I live in a small apartment in New Mexico now, as far from any major water sources I can get. I sleep with the lights on, and I check the locks 4 times before bed. But I can't escape the truth. We opened something down there. We woke something up. And now it's spreading, finding new paths to the surface, new hunting grounds. The disappearances are just the beginning. As the climate changes, as water tables shift and sinkholes become more common, there will be more doors, more opportunities for those things to reach us. And when they do, when they finally emerge in numbers too large to ignore, it'll be too late. Director Vance told me the property was purchased by Northspan Holdings. I did some digging over the years, following paper trails and corporate records through dozens of databases and public filings. Northspan is a shell company owned by another shell company called Meridian Geological, which is owned by something called the Harwood Trust, which is owned by another shell company based in the Cayman Islands. The trail goes in circles, designed by expensive lawyers to obscure whoever's really behind it. But I did find a few interesting details. Northspan has been buying land, lots of land, Remote properties all across Appalachia, stretching from West Virginia down through Kentucky and Tennessee to northern Georgia. Properties that just happen to sit on top of the same Ordovician limestone formations that created that cave system in the first place. They've purchased more than 40,000 acres in the last 5 years alone, always through intermediaries, always at above-market prices. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. They're not developing any of it. No mining operations, no logging, no tourism, just fences and cameras and no trespassing signs in languages I don't even recognize. They're not containing the threat. They're mapping it. They're studying it. And they're making sure no one else gets close enough to see what's really happening in those mountains. I got a call last week. Blocked number, just like before. The voice on the other end was different this time. Younger, nervous, but the message was familiar. Mr. Ward, we've had another incident. Your expertise is required. The compensation will be substantial. I hung up. They called again. And again. Left voicemails promising money, promising answers, promising all the things they promised 6 years ago. I deleted every one. I'm done diving, done exploring, done risking my life for people who see us as expendable assets, as canaries in the coal mine for whatever horrors they're trying to understand. They can find someone else to feed to those things. It won't be me, but I'm not done warning people. So here's my warning. Stay away from the dark water. Stay away from the deep places, the unexplored spaces, the holes in the earth that go down and never seem to end. Because something lives there. Something that's been waiting since before humans walked this continent, and it's not waiting anymore. Every year, about 50,000 people go missing in the United States. Most of them turn up eventually. Runaways, people who want to disappear, victims of crimes that get solved. But a significant percentage are never found. No bodies, no evidence, no explanation. They simply vanish, as if they'd never existed at all. I used to think those were just statistics, numbers on a page that didn't mean anything personal. Now I wonder how many of them ended up somewhere dark and wet, surrounded by pale shapes with too many teeth. I wonder how many of them died screaming, like Reese. This is my testimony. My confession. The NDA expired last month, and I promised myself I'd tell this story when it did. Not because I think anyone will believe me, you won't, but because you deserve to know what's out there, what's waiting in the dark places of the world, the spaces we haven't explored, the depths we thought were empty. They're not empty. They never were. And whatever you do, whatever adventures you're planning, whatever places you want to explore, don't go down into the dark, because something down there is hungry. Something down there has been hungry for a very, very long time, and it's learning. It's learning about us, every missing person, every disappearance, every unexplained death in those mountains. It's all data, all information about how we move, where we go, what makes us vulnerable. 50,000 years of isolation gave those things time to evolve. Now they're adapting again, adapting to us. And when they're ready, when they've learned enough, they'll stop hiding. They'll stop waiting. And by then, it'll be far too late for any of us. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because the silence has been eating me alive for 6 years. Maybe because I owe it to Reese and to all the others who died down there to make sure someone knows the truth. Maybe because I'm hoping that somehow, somewhere, someone with more power than me will read this and do something about it before it's too late. Or maybe I just need to get it out of my head and onto paper so I can stop carrying it alone. Whatever the reason, here it is. My story, my confession, my warning. If you're planning a camping trip in rural Appalachia, Think twice. Check the geological surveys. Look for sinkholes, for caves, for any sign of underground water systems. And if you find yourself in a place that feels wrong, a place where the animals are too quiet, where the shadows seem too deep, where something in your gut is screaming at you to leave, listen to that feeling. Turn around, walk away. Because I've seen what waits in the dark places of this world. I've looked into those milky white eyes and seen an intelligence that predates human civilization. I've felt those long fingers wrapping around human flesh, felt the cold of water that hasn't seen sunlight in 50,000 years. And I'm telling you now, with every ounce of conviction I have left, some doors should never be opened, some depths should never be explored, and some things that live in the dark should be left there forever.